Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt on a very sad Friday, May the 29th. We are in the grips of a pandemic, and 100,000 Americans have died. And now, one of my favorite cities in the world, Minneapolis, is just engulfed in violence. And if you're listening on AM 1280, The Patriot, give me a call at 1-800-520-1234. I've had very few affiliates from day one, and AM 1280, The Patriot, has been with me for 20 years. Not quite 20 years. It's 20 years on July 10. But and my friends up there, the Northern Alliance, Hinderacker and Scott Johnson and Lilacs and Ed Morrissey and Mitch Spurg, and I could just keep naming people left and right. Jay Larson, get to work, and I'd go to the state fair every year, and sometimes we wouldn't go every year because Jay would block us, but we did. Hugh Hewitt on Ice. We did Hugh Hewitt on Ice twice. Did Hugh Hewitt on Ice thrice. We did Hugh Hewitt on Ice 5-1. We did hockey games and ski slopes. We did snowmobiling, which almost ended in a terrible disaster. I just love. We go to the state fair and people come and throw stuff at the studio, and Lilacs would show up occasionally. I haven't seen him in years. The man doesn't wake up. He's like a ghoul. He only lives at night. But if you'd asked me what city is the least likely city in America to have urban riots, it would be Minneapolis, St. Paul. I just really, I started in television in 1992, broadcast in 1990, did radio on the weekends and for KFI in LA, and then I went over and did the nightly news with PBS. And the first full month on the job were the LA riots, driving around LA in the middle of the National Guards and fires and death, and think this is an interesting way to start in television journalism. But LA had riots before, and I grew up in Warren, Ohio, and Youngstown had riots. I remember the long, hot summers of 67 and 68. And Minneapolis, I would never have believed Minneapolis could have urban riots, even with the murder of George Floyd. Andy is calling in from AM 1280, The Patriot. Good morning, Andy. How are you?
Pretty good.
So,
Thanks for taking my call.
Go ahead.
I live about a mile south of Lake Street. So, as the crows fly south, west of where everything is on fire.
So a night of sirens, and were you afraid through the evening, or was it far enough away that you could?
It's far enough away. It's not that big a deal. I mean, I let my dog out this morning. All you smell is smoke. It's disgusting. Burning plastic, and, it's not like campfire, gnarly. But pretty disappointed in my town right now, though.
Well, I'm disappointed in 4 police officers who allowed that man to die. And in fact, I got to ask Andy before I let you go. Are you shocked by I've never had anything but great interactions with the Minneapolis police. And I saw them every year at the fair. They're always at the fair, right? You talk to the cops. It's a great police department. Are you shocked?
Not really. I mean, they've had bad interactions, but it's a handful of bad people that wreck the whole department.
I would guess, that one of the cops who was accused, fired, had previously been referred to prosecution. Amy Klobuchar said no. So I just want people to note, Amy Klobuchar is no longer on the short list for vice president. That's done. Thank you, Andy. Here's the Minneapolis Star-Tribune story by Andy Mannix. An angry crowd broke into the Minneapolis Police Department's 3rd Precinct headquarters Thursday night. Just stop and think about that. They broke into a police headquarters? An angry crowd, that's a mob, and that's illegal. And the police retreated, I guess, and set fire to the building. Okay, so you're endangering firemen. So the police retreated and firemen got endangered, capping another day of protests, many of them violent. The police station on East Lake Street has been the epicenter of this protest for weeks. This week, for people demanding justice after the death of George Floyd, who died Monday. Minnehaha Lake Wine and Spirits, the target of looters the night before, was set ablaze. Protests have been taking across the metro all day long, both peaceful and violent. On Wednesday night, a man was fatally shot as crowds looted and burned buildings on East Lake Street late into the night. It has spread to St. Paul, and I don't know what the weather forecast is. If I had a producer, I would know whether it was going to be a long, hot weekend. If it's going to be a long, hot weekend, that's bad. And I do know Minneapolis pretty well. I am a veteran of rolling around. The hotel in St. Paul, the St. Paul is my favorite hotel. St. Paul Cathedral is my favorite church in America. I love the Charlie Brown week. I love everything about the city. I go there often, and if it wasn't for the fact that it was in Minnesota cold, I would live there part of the year.
Perfect weekend ahead. It's going to be about 70 degrees and sunny all 3 days.
Well, that's good. It's not going to be hot.
No.
If it was hot, I would say, oh, my goodness, we're in trouble. Look, the Michael Freeman, who was Amy Klobuchar's successor, Amy punted on the bad cop charge. He did not help things yesterday. Cut number 19.
Nothing to do with it?
I think part of the problem is, sir, the video goes on for 7 minutes. He is clearly struggling to breathe during that time. And I think people will be hard-pressed to understand how you can't bring charges, at least against the officer who had his knee on that man's neck.
It's a violation of my ethics to talk and evaluate evidence before we announce our charging decision. And I will not do that. I will say this, that video is graphic and horrific and terrible, and no person should do that. But my job in the end is to prove that he violated a criminal statute. And there is other evidence that does not support a criminal charge. We need to wade through all of that evidence to come through with a meaningful determination, and we are doing that to the best of our ability.
That is the Hennepin County District Attorney, former, by the way, two-time candidate for the Democrats for governor in Minnesota. Maxine Waters, of course, knows exactly who's responsible. She was on TMZ last night. Cut 18. I remind her of Tamir Rice and all of the other. Tim Scott just rattled off all the people who died under President Obama. It is a magnification of a problem that exists in every community whenever a death occurs, but it is a continuing problem because a police department has to get it right 100% of the time. And if they have one error, it's a disaster. President in the Oval Office spray yesterday spoke specifically about the death of George Floyd, cut number 13.
No, I haven't, but I feel very, very badly. It's a very shocking sight. Bill and I were talking about it before. It's one of the reasons Bill's here right now, because, as you know, we're very much involved. And I've asked the Attorney General, FBI, and the Attorney General to take a very strong look and to see what went on, because that was a very, very bad thing that I saw. I saw it last night, and I didn't like it.
That was the president. Bill Barr has, of course, stepped in already and directed that there will be enhanced and rapid Federal Bureau of Investigation review of the civil rights violations involved in the murder of George Floyd. I say murder because I honestly, I don't know how you can cut this any other way. I don't know where they moved the trial. I've seen a lot of stuff in 30 years. I ain't everything like that video. I'll be right back. 1-800-520-1234. Of course, he's presumed innocent until proven guilty, as are the other officers, of course. There'll be a trial and their procedural rights will be protected, and they'll find 10 people or 12 people who live in a cave and haven't seen the video. They will. They just will. That's how we do it in America, unless you're named Michael Flynn, in which case you're railroaded. Stay tuned, America.
Trending now on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
On a personal level, Mr. Secretary, not as Secretary of State, do you believe that the Communist Chinese Party has told us the truth on any significant issue in the last 3 months?
Well, I'm sure there have been things they've accurately described to us, but it's pretty clear at this point that the Chinese Communist Party is one of its central challenges in any institution that is authoritarian is the absence of the ability for information to flow freely. You saw this, Hugh, in the weeks before this. They decided to kick out U.S. journalists from the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post. You saw what happened when doctors raised their hand and said, hey, I think we have a problem. I think we potentially have a human-to-human virus, and it's spread. And they suppressed that by coercion and worse. Those are the kind of things that authoritarian regimes do. It's the nature of those regimes. And as a result of that, the information didn't get to the right places. And so for days and weeks, the world didn't know what was confronting it. And in a virus like this, those first hours and days and weeks are the most critical in stopping the spread. And the Chinese Communist Party failed to do that properly. I'll say this too, Hugh. We still need transparency today. We need openness today. We are still in the middle of this. We still don't know the precise source and origin spot of the virus. That will turn out to be important for epidemiologists and experts to help us get to the backside of this. We still need that kind of openness, and we urge every country that has information about the virus and data sets and is working on a vaccine or therapeutics to share that information broadly in the scientific community.
This is Albert Mohler for townhall.com. A chilling headline ran over Easter weekend from CNN. Louisville police officers to record license plate numbers of Easter weekend churchgoers. Over the course of this pandemic, I've argued that churches should follow generally applicable shelter-in-place orders, that these orders and guidelines do not violate religious liberty. Indeed, we ought to comply with them out of love of neighbor. But if policies single out churches and religious groups, it becomes an entirely different issue, an unconstitutional violation of religious liberty. Over the course of the last several weeks, some government officials have crossed the line. In the case of Louisville, it took a restraining order from United States District Court Judge Justin Walker to curtail Louisville Mayor Greg Fisher's attempt to prevent even drive-in church gatherings. The judge said, quote, "The mayor's decision is stunning, and it is beyond all reason unconstitutional. Consider this. In America, in 2020, comes the threat that they're taking names and they're taking numbers. It's extremely important that all American Christians take note, and in a hurry." I'm Albert Mohler.
ADF, fighting for those whose religious freedom is being violated. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
This nation that we live in right now is under attack. The values upon which it was built have been systematically sabotaged for decades. But in the last 8 years of the Obama administration, that desire to dismantle what we represent was shared by those in the highest office of the land.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt on a sad Friday morning. George Floyd dead, riots occurring in Minneapolis, 100,000 Americans dead of the virus, 5 million cases worldwide. Yeah, it's a bummer of a Friday. There is a good bit of news. You folks all month long have been really showing the other side by stepping up to send children who have a mom or dad in jail help. Angel Tree care packages arriving all across the country to the 1 in 28 children in America who have a mom or dad in prison. Some of them have both parents in prison by no fault of their own. Their summers are just endless. They don't go to school. They get no break. Normally we send them to camp. We will be sending some of them to camp because a few camps are open, but not many. But we're going to reach out to all these kids again, and thanks to your generosity, we have a $20,000 matching grant underway right now for the last day of the campaign. If you make a $400 donation, it becomes $800. That's Steelers math. I can get that. You don't get $800. You end up contributing $800 when you give $400. That's probably confused the Steeler fans. All you have to do is go to HughHewitt.com and click on the Angel Tree banner. Or you can call 888-206-2764, 888-206-2764. Remember as well, if you're going to get masks, I am going to go see my grandkids. Commonwealth of Virginia approved, quarantined on both ends. For me, 10 weeks, fetching Mrs. Hewitt 2, grandkids 10. Everything is fine, door to door, living by the rules, but we'll take masks if I have to go out. And those masks come from givingmasks.com/you with every order of masks from givingmasks.com/you. They give one of the high-end ones, the really expensive ones. What do they call them? I don't know. They're called something special. They give one to one of the children's hospitals that I've designated because they always need masks. And these hospitals love getting masks. Thank you. Go to givingmasks.com/you to be a part of that. What did markets do in the middle of all of this? I haven't even gotten yet to what Twitter's inanity. Twitter actually fact-checked the president again yesterday, proving to me about the Minneapolis riots. He posted something about the riots, and Twitter's Genius collection censored him or framed him or put a note on his tweet. Nobody else in America is getting this, by the way. He tweeted something about this must end, and they put it on, proving to me that Jack Dorsey, otherwise known as Jack, that he checks in annually on Twitter, and then he goes back to his island, and he leaves George Costanza in charge. I mean, Twitter is really run by morons. And Jack Dorsey invented, the intersection of technology and need. He got lucky. He's not a genius. It's just the first adapter, and it worked. And it's fun, and everyone uses it. And then they have these morons who think they're in charge of social engineering, and they come in and they start doing this stuff. I was reminded of George Costanza because I was watching Seinfeld last night when George quit. That's what I spend my day. And when George quit, he hadn't had a plan B to get a new job. So this is what George said to Seinfeld about what he might want to do. Actually, most people out there think you just do walk into the AM 1280 building or the other building and started talking. That's what most people think. But I have come to believe that George Costanza actually went to work at Twitter. I really do. I think George Costanza went to work at Twitter. When I read that story this morning, that Twitter had censored the president over a tweet about Minneapolis, I said, yep, George Costanza went to Twitter. Jack goes back to his island with his billions of dollars, and George Costanza runs things. I'll be right back, America. Sonny Bunch is up, and I'll be back on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Trending now on the Larry Elder Show.
But I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black.
It don't have nothing to do with Trump. It has to do with the fact I want something for my community. I would love to see.
Take a look at my record, man. I extended the voting rights 25 years. I have a record that is second to none. The NAACP has endorsed me every time I've run. Come on. Take a look at the record.
All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Anyway, thanks. I will come back.
All right.
I look forward to seeing you in person.
Okay, absolutely.
Okay, pal. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it, Charlamagne. If you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black.
Notice Charlamagne had absolutely no problem with that. Either he didn't really hear it, or he didn't appreciate how he was being insulted, or he agrees with it. Either way, it's bad. If you have a problem figuring out where you want me or Trump, then you ain't black. Trump's black support is probably at least twice what it was in 2016, which means Joe Biden is asserting that there are millions of black people who are going to vote for Donald Trump who aren't really black.
I'm in trouble.
Of course, this is how he rolls, isn't it?
Trending now on the Larry Elder Show.
Riddle me this. Who said this? Quote, "There is no one way to be black." Take it from somebody who has seen both sides of the debate about whether I'm black enough, end of quote. Who do you think said that? Joe Biden's boss, Barack Obama. There is no one way to be black. Take it from somebody who's seen both sides of the debate about whether I'm black enough, end of quote. Do you know that that assertion was made against Obama when Obama ran for Congress against Bobby Rush, who's still in the House? Bobby Rush characterized him as not really black. He's not really from the city. He's from Honolulu. He went to Harvard. He teaches at University of Chicago. He lives in Hyde Park. He really isn't one of us. Hello? That same charge was used against Biden's boss, and now Biden is using it. Is this thing on?
Do you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump and you ain't black?
But then again, this is how they roll. Remember this gentleman?
I don't know how anyone of Hispanic heritage could be a Republican. Okay? Do I need to say more?
I don't know how many times I have been accused of being, quote, put here.
Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
Hey, folks, I'm talking to Ken Starr. It's the Eric Metaxas Show. I'm holding in my hand his latest book. It's called Contempt. How would you answer someone who says what you did with Clinton is just about the same thing that Mueller et al. Did with Trump? What is the difference in your mind of your investigation and his?
The end product was we found absolute ironclad crimes. 14 different people were convicted in the Whitewater investigation, and for very substantive offenses. A number of the prosecutions, I don't say this critically, but it's a difference, in the Mueller investigation were convicted of so-called process crimes. Think of General Flynn, right? That, of course, is now being revisited. We will see what happens. I'm making no predictions about that. But with respect to the President of the United States, we found clear-cut evidence of crimes, perjury and obstruction of justice. And that's all laid out in the Starr referral. What Bob found, and what Bob Mueller found, was that there was no Russian collusion. Vladimir Putin, according to the report, it'd be intriguing to get Bob Mueller to say here were his sources if he could reveal them. He might not be able to. Vladimir Putin, after the election, calls together some of his closest advisors.
Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
Young people today, not even young, I would say even under 40, do not know what America was like when it was truly free. It's an early memory.
Get back to normal until we find a vaccine. And I wrote, California hasn't been normal.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt on Friday. It's Friday, and that means Sonny Bunch of Rebeller Media. You can follow Sonny on Twitter at Sonny Bunch. You can follow Rebeller Media at rebellermedia.com. I think Twitter has got a new notice to attach to Sonny Bunch tweets, though, failure to warn, and Twitter will be applying that soon. Today, Sonny's top 10 musicals of all time. Hello, Sonny. Good morning.
Oh, no, musicals. You know I don't like musicals.
Well, I got to put you on your toe. What do you like? Well, look, this is week 9. No, it's week 10 of the quarantine.
Yeah.
I'm watching Seinfeld reruns.
Yeah, that sounds about right. We're running out of stuff to watch here. I watched Grant. I watched the History Channel of Grant. You wanted to talk about that?
Actually, a Senate inquiry was directed to me. I think you were going to be called as a witness if you didn't do this.
Sure. It's good. It's fine. It is interesting and informative and entertaining. I probably learned more about like the tactics of actual Civil War battles here than I did at any point in high school. Certainly.
Did you learn that Grant's from Ohio?
Is that where he's actually from?
Yes, Grant is an Ohio guy. Saved the Union. Ohio was saved by Grant.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, certainly. I mean
the Union was saved by an Ohioan. That's what I meant.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sure. This is the fact that Ulysses S. Grant saved the Union twice. Really, I mean, not just in war, but also in peace. Is I think underappreciated by audiences and viewers today, which is what the History Channel program was designed to counter. He is something of a lost historical figure to us, and this movie does it, or this like TV series, docudrama, whatever you want to call it. It's not a pure documentary, and it's not a pure movie or drama, but this kind of weird hybrid thing.
What is it, Sonny? Is it like The Crown? I haven't seen a lick of it yet. Is it like The Crown?
No, it's not like The Crown at all. I mean, the Crown is pure drama. It's a TV show. It's done. It's based on history, sure, but it is pure acting. This is a mix of kind of talking head documentaries with a bunch of, folks from colleges and whatnot, and then also
folks from colleges,
folks from professors.
Yes, I know. That's a great category. They should use that as the lower third. Folk from college.
Yeah, and then and also like historical recreations and
those are typically awful though. Those are typically really bad.
The guy they have playing Grant here is very solidly, laconic and ramrod stiff. He works, I think. I mean, it is what it is. It's not high art, and it is not going to win tons of awards, right? And it's not it's not a pure documentary, but I think it's interesting, and it is designed to appeal to people in a way that both entertains and informs and educates them at the same time. So I mean, it's fine. It's so again, we're in week 10 or whatever of lockdown here, quarantine, and running out of stuff to watch. It's a perfectly acceptable.
I have a recommendation for a big star playing historical figure. Terrible category, terrible for 500. Art Fleming. That would be, or if you want to go, modern, it would be the other guy, Alex Trebek. That would be Laurence Olivier playing MacArthur in the aptly named MacArthur. Have you ever seen that?
No.
Don't. This is a failure to. I'm not going to be accused of. Don't watch that. It's the worst movie ever made. I think arguably the worst movie ever made.
What? Wait. So what was it that I failed to warn about?
Well, you didn't. It was. I'm making sure I can't be accused of a failure to warn because MacArthur is the worst movie ever made, even though Laurence Olivier plays MacArthur.
Gotcha.
It was made by the Moonies.
Oh yeah. Well, that sounds. And Laurence Olivier doesn't really strike. I mean, Laurence Olivier, obviously one of our great actors. So I shouldn't say this necessarily.
Well, when you said standing ramrod straight, When you said standing ramrod, that's what I thought. That's what he did the whole movie with a corncob pipe. He just stood straight. What else do we watch, Sonny? You're not coming through here. You said, Grant, you gave it kind of a meh.
No, I wouldn't say it's meh. I mean, I think it's worth watching. It's not. Again, it's not high art. It's not going to win awards, but it's fine. It's entertaining. It's entertaining enough, and again, it is worth remembering. What sort of president and leader Grant was, both on and off the battlefield. And I learned, you learn a lot about his early life in this, and he came from a hard scrabble background. He was
in Ohio.
In Ohio, and it's interesting. He came from a family of abolitionists and married into a slave-owning family from the South.
But the abolitionists were in Ohio because we were a free soil abolitionist state.
Exactly, and he and it was very hard for him, trying to deal with that in his family. His family did not actually attend the wedding at all because they were so horrified. But when he was given the chance, he freed his family slaves, and that was well before the war.
What would you say you learned, Sonny, about his tactics? I have a very fixed view of, and I've read a lot of Civil War history. Of course, I'm a civilian, but I have a lot of Civil War history jammed in here. I have a view of his tactics. Do you have a summary view of his tactics?
That he was a constant attacker. He was not. Yep. He was after a series of generals who kind of would, hit and fall back, or fall back and fall back. He was constantly on the move and constantly on the attack. There's one great moment and scene in this where they're talking about how after taking Richmond, after Petersburg falls, right, any other Union general would have had victory parades in Richmond and would have sent telegrams back to Lincoln like, I have taken the capital of the Confederacy, blah, blah. And instead, he wins the victory. Robert E. Lee is retreating as fast as he can, and instead, he goes on the attack again. He continues following him. He sends the cavalry. He's harassing all the way out of town, so to speak. So, he was constantly on the attack. Sometimes it didn't always work. I had either forgotten or had not known in the first place about the effort to dig mine shafts underneath the Confederate line, and put essentially giant bombs, tons of gunpowder and whatnot, under the Confederate fort works, and just blow it up. I mean, it's very cinematic. It's like something out of a movie. Now the problem is he had a guy in charge in that battle who sent the troops kind of into the hole that they made, which was obviously a disaster.
You were supposed to go around it. Yeah, there is. By the way, in Peaky Blinders, the lead character Tommy was a digger in World War I, where that was a common tactic in World War I, to dig mines and blow up the opposition trenches, and it was just ugly, terrible work. But this Petersburg attack, I haven't been down to see the crater, which exists, but I got to go see it. The wilderness is my favorite quote. I don't know if they quoted in the series where he said, I intend to fight on this line if it takes all summer, to Lincoln. The Union was ready, the Army of Potomac was ready to retreat, because that's what they always did. After a big battle, they always retreated, and Grant said, nope, we're going to, just when you've got a 3-1 advantage, all you do is attack.
Yeah. So, it was interesting. I definitely learned some stuff. I'm not a big Civil War buff. Are
you a big History Channel guy? Or my wife used to call it the Hitler Channel with the H on it, because for a long time, the History Channel had Vikings or Hitler. That was it.
Vikings, Hitler, and Ancient Aliens.
Yeah, that was a subcategory that actually Chuck Grassley really got upset about.
Yeah. No,
Did you know that?
The only show I do, I remember that. Yeah, the only show I used to watch regularly on the History Channel was Pawn Stars. Honestly, I was always a fan of Pawn Stars, which is kind of fun and silly, and but certainly not history.
That's an admission against interest, Sonny, as we say in the law. Do you have anything else? I got to go do my break here. Have you got anything else for it? I mean, is anyone doing anything
there's an actual movie out called The Vast of Night. It's going to be hitting Amazon Prime, I think today. I think it actually debuts today. But it is a kind of cerebral sci-fi type movie. It stars a bunch of no names. It's nobody you ever knew. It's directed by Andrew Patterson. This is his first movie. It's about a couple of kids in New Mexico who are high school students, or just one is, I think, just out of high school. The other is in high school. One works at the woman of this group. Her name is Faye. She works at the local switchboard station. It's set in the 1950s. The other works at the local AM radio station, and they essentially, are in the midst of an alien attack. Perhaps there's a weird noise coming in over all of the lines, and they're trying to figure out what it is. And it is, again, it's a cerebral sci-fi thriller. I would describe it as. It's very talky. It is a tight 90 minutes, which is nice. It does not linger or overstay its welcome. The script is very much in that 1950s patois. The young man who's played by Jake Horowitz, his name is Everett, is a kind of smooth talking 1950s type. Faye is kind of a nervous, 17-year-old girl who is trying to figure out what is going on here, and again, I would not describe this as a great movie. It's like 95% fresher or something on Rotten Tomatoes right now, which strikes me as much as anything as a need for a real movie to be out right now, because I think critics are kind of desperate for something. But it's very well shot. It's very interestingly shot too. The camera's constantly in movement, constantly in motion. It takes us throughout this small little town to give us a sense of the space of the place, to give us a real sense of the vast of the night, really, which is, again,
I'm going to counter. I'm going to see and raise you. You made me think of Goonies when you said high science fiction, very talky, which made me think of Robert Davi, which made me think of Kill the Irishman with Christopher Walken and Robert Davi. I'm going to counter with Kill the Irishman. Have you ever seen it?
That's not news, Hugh. That's not. We're not trying to, tell people to watch the old things. Uncut Gems is also on Netflix now.
Oh, well, now, actually, they should watch Uncut Gems. That is a movie worth watching. It was screwed by the Oscars. Agreed?
Yeah, very much so.
Right,
Sandler deserved at least a nomination.
At least on that note of agreement, Sonny Bunch, thank you, my friend. Follow him at rebellermedia.com or on Twitter at Sonny Bunch. I still think you should watch Kill the Irishman. And let me tell you again, relieffactor.com, that time of the day. I'm spending time in the car today, lots of time in the car today, and that means back problems. That means, I should be out walking. Instead, I'm sitting in the car. I hate sitting in a car. And there it goes. Oh, let me get my lukewarm coffee, which is not really enough there to swallow the pills. Have some water. Strategic deficit and lukewarm coffee this morning, but I still got my relieffactor.com down. I carry in Kirkman resveratrol Omega. You should be taking it every morning, just like me. Go to relieffactor.com. $19.95. Get your starter pack. Come right back. Tarzana Joe is next.
More children died in their bathtub than from the virus. And you can't go to work in Pennsylvania.
Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
Listen to this one from the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. On the USS Theodore Roosevelt, 1,102 sailors were infected. That's a lot. That's a lot. How many you think died? These are not children. Do you know the answer? Because I want you, if you don't know, I want you to guess. 1,102 sailors were infected. How many needed to go to a hospital and how many died? Sean, guess. 1,100 on a ship So they really got it, man. They really got it. 100 went to the hospital, 2 died is Triple G's response. Living martyr?
Yeah.
Same? 50 hospital,
2.
And 2 died. Yeah. Answer, 7 hospital, 1 died. Wow! We are living through hysteria, and most Americans are at peace with tyranny. My dear friends, anybody says, what does MAGA mean? Make America great again? It means MAFA. Make America free again.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
This nation that we live in right now is under attack. The values upon which it was built have been systematically sabotaged for decades. But in the last 8 years of the Obama administration, that desire to dismantle what we represent was shared by those in the highest office of the land.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
Joined now by the poet laureate of the Hugh Hewitt Show, Tarzana Joe. Hello, Joe.
Hello, Hugh. How are you?
I am terrific. I hope all people on Team Tarzana are good.
Yes, we are. And we'll get to the poem right now. I'd like to share a secret, one that's known to quite a few. Novel isn't normal, and normal isn't new. I never thought I'd see the day, and you know what I mean. I'd have so much affection for the rote and the routine. I miss the way I feel when I put on my 3-piece suit. I miss my morning muffin, and I miss my long commute. I even miss the meetings, those where nothing would get done, and of course the corporate seminars. My goodness, they were fun. I've formed a deep affection for the way we used to live. For getting back to normalcy, there's nothing I wouldn't give. And then at once it struck me, like my finger in a blender. Harding was elected on much the same agenda. He ran upon a platform aimed to cut through all the noise, rejecting revolution with a call for equipoise, abjuring global favor for triumphant nationality, sentiments which won for him far more than a plurality. The sun keeps rising in the east, the planet's still revolving. Despite progressive efforts, most species are evolving. Spring precedes the summer, and winter follows fall. Perhaps this kind of moment is quite normal, after all. That's the New Normality by Tarzana Joe.
I certainly hope it is quite normal after all. I hope we're in for baseball, Joe, and a normal summer and beaches and all that kind of stuff because, frankly, America's just about had it with this, right?
Stanley Cup playoffs in August is what I'm looking for.
That could be very disorienting to you, Joe. But meanwhile, will you be able to write poetry even if you were disoriented with the hockey on the screen in August?
It'll be a distraction, but I'll focus.
For all your poetry needs, write Joe at tarzanajoe@reagan.com, tarzanajoe@reagan.com. Rates are reasonable, and today's verse will be posted at tarzanajoe.com, I hope?
Correct.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Hugh.
Time to talk to you about Birch Gold and do a market check. And remember, Birch Gold is best reached at hughgold.com, or you can text my name, Hugh, to 474747. You've got to diversify. Yesterday, I spent more than an hour talking to one of the country's leading institutional investors, advisor. institutional investment advisor. What that means is this individual advises colleges, universities, not-for-profits on how to invest their endowment money, what to do. And some of the statistics are just striking. In the last 10 weeks, there have been a total of 448 separate global stimulus measures taken worldwide. So, when the Fed drops the rates to zero, that's one measure. When phase 1 passes, that's 2 measures. When phase 3 passes, that's 3 measures. When phase 4 comes along, that'll be another measure. But worldwide, there have been 448 moves by central banking authorities or governments to stimulate the economy. The money supply, the M2, is up 22% in 10 weeks. The Fed balance sheet, the assets that the Fed has bought using their money to push liquidity into the system, has gone from $4 trillion to $7 trillion in 10 weeks. Now, you know what that means? That means the most massive liquidity burst in history. In the history of the globe, there has never been this much money pushed into markets by every government in the world. Good governments like ours and bad governments like the Chinese Communist Party, and every government in between, has pushed money into the market and done what they can to reinflate the economy, and that's the key word, reinflation. So you know what this institutional advisor was saying? That you're not going to believe me, even though the market's gained back, 75% of what it lost in the March shock, even though we're still coming out of the medically induced economic coma. The response was, you got to worry about inflation. To which one of my colleagues said, I've been worrying about inflation since 2008, and it hadn't come. And I've always asked Brian Westbury about inflation, and it hadn't come. I have to worry about inflation. You just can't do this. I mean, if everything we've ever thought about economics, you cannot do this without inflationary impact. What do you want to be diversified into? At least equities and gold. Equities and gold. Gold this morning is at $17.25. When I first started telling you about Birch Gold, it was at $1,400. It's at $17.25. All right, light crude is down at $32.95. The 10-year Treasury is at 0.7. Yesterday, the market was down a little bit, 147 points on the Dow. The NASDAQ was off 43. The S&P was down 6. Overseas, England and Germany are off 1% as people begin to figure out, maybe we priced in the boom for this week. Maybe we'll go home for the weekend and see what happens. That's what happens on Fridays. I wouldn't sleep on that. Because I just look at this $7 trillion balance sheet at the Fed, 22% increase in money supply. Go to HughGold.com for information. Text my name, Hugh, H-U-G-H, to 474747. You can trust Birch Gold. You ought to have some gold in your safety deposit box. You ought to be diversified into precious metals a little bit in your retirement funds, 10, 25%, no more than that. Don't over-diversify. I'm not a gold bug, but I am serious. HughGold.com. Coming back for hour number 2 of the Friday edition of the Hugh Hewitt Show. Stay tuned.
Trending now on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
On a personal level, Mr. Secretary, not as Secretary of State, do you believe that the Communist Chinese Party has told us the truth on any significant issue in the last 3 months?
Well, I'm sure there have been things they've accurately described to us, but it's pretty clear at this point that the Chinese Communist Party is one of its central challenges in any institution that is authoritarian is the absence of the ability for information to flow freely. You saw this, Hugh, in the weeks before this. They decided to kick out U.S. journalists from the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post. You saw what happened when doctors raised their hand and said, hey, I think we have a problem. I think we potentially have a human-to-human virus, and it's spread. And they suppressed that by coercion and worse. Those are the kind of things that authoritarian regimes do. It's the nature of those regimes. And as a result of that, the information didn't get to the right places. And so for days and weeks, the world didn't know what was confronting it. And in a virus like this, those first hours and days and weeks are the most critical in stopping the spread. And the Chinese Communist Party failed to do that properly. I'll say this too, Hugh. We still need transparency today. We need openness today. We are still in the middle of this. We still don't know the precise source and origin spot of the virus. That will turn out to be important for epidemiologists and experts to help us get to the backside of this. We still need that kind of openness, and we urge every country that has information about the virus and data sets and is working on a vaccine or therapeutics to share that information broadly in the scientific community.
Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
Young people today, not even young, I would say even under 40, do not know what America was like when it was truly free. It's an early memory. There was a lightness, that's what it is. There was a lightness to American life. Today it is heavy.
Yeah, I had put a tweet out, I think about a day ago, that's gotten, 1.4 million looks on it. It was a tweet. It said, somebody's told me Gavin Newsom says California won't get back to normal until we find a vaccine. And I wrote, California hasn't been normal.
More children died in their bathtub than from the virus. And you can't go to work in Pennsylvania.
Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
Listen to this one from the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. On the USS Theodore Roosevelt, 1,102 sailors were infected. That's a lot. That's a lot. How many you think died? These are not children. Do you know the answer? Because if you don't know, I want you to guess. 1,102 sailors were infected. How many needed to go to a hospital and how many died? Sean, guess. 1,100 on a ship. So they really got it, man. They really got it. 100 went to the hospital, 2 died is Triple G's response. Living martyr? Yeah. Same? 50 hospital, 2. And 2 died. Yeah. Answer, 7 hospital, 1 died. Wow! We are living through hysteria, and most Americans are at peace with tyranny. My dear friends, anybody says, what does MAGA mean? Make America great again? It means MAFA. Make America free again.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
In Minnesota, this is an actual factual reporting. The governor of Minnesota will allow 50 people in restaurants, but churches can only have 10. The governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, announced yesterday restaurants can host up to 50 customers in outdoor seatings, but churches will still be limited to 10, even outdoors. Now, again, call me crazy, call me cynical. I'm not quite able to wrap my brain around a church being told you can't have any more than 10 worshipers, even outside in the parking lot, but 50 people dining is A-okay with us in the state of Minnesota. Well, Do you know what the Catholic Church is doing in Minnesota? They're saying, go pound salt. The Catholic Church in Minnesota issued a letter yesterday. The Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis announced they will just not be complying with the governor's mandate. The Archdiocese of Minnesota is pointing out, the Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis, the Twin Cities, they're pointing out the governor lifted Minnesota's stay-at-home order. But under the order, a maximum of 10 people are allowed within a confined space during worship services. The state's Catholic Church believes services can be held on its own terms as long as they take proper sanitation measures, private social distancing protocols, and 1/3 limited capacity. The letter says, we are blessed to live in a nation that guarantees the free exercise of religion. This right can only be abridged for a compelling governmental interest. That's why a large majority of states now allow in-person religious services. The letter is very explicit.
This is Albert Mohler for townhall.com. A chilling headline ran over Easter weekend from CNN. Louisville police officers to record license plate numbers of Easter weekend churchgoers. Over the course of this pandemic, I've argued that churches should follow generally applicable shelter-in-place orders, that these orders and guidelines do not violate religious liberty. Indeed, we ought to comply with them out of love of neighbor. But if policies single out churches and religious groups, it becomes an entirely different issue, an unconstitutional violation of religious liberty. Over the course of the last several weeks, some government officials have crossed the line. In the case of Louisville, it took a restraining order from United States District Court Judge Justin Walker to curtail Louisville Mayor Greg Fisher's attempt to prevent even drive-in church gatherings. The comes that all American Christians take note, and in a hurry. I'm Albert Mohler.
ADF, fighting for those whose religious freedom is being violated.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. It is Friday, May the 29th, in the year of the plague 2020. I begin this hour with the United States Senator Rick Scott from the great state of Florida. Good morning, Senator Scott. It's great to have you.
Good morning, Hugh. It's a beautiful day in Florida.
Now, I understand you are a member of the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, correct?
Absolutely.
All right. Technology is then under your purview. I want everyone to be on the same page as I ask you this question. Yesterday, the president tweeted about the riots in Minneapolis, that these thugs are dishonoring the memory of George Floyd, and I won't let that happen. Just spoke with Governor Tim Walz and told him the military is with him all the way. Any difficulty, we will assume control, but when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Thank you. Twitter censored him or framed him, saying that he had placed a public interest notice on the tweet from real Donald Trump, explaining we've taken action in the interest of preventing others from being inspired to commit violent acts, but have kept the tweet on Twitter because it's important the public still be able to see the tweet given its relevance to ongoing matters of public importance. Quite simply, Senator Scott, Section 230 of the Communication Broadcast Act allows people like Twitter not to be responsible for defamatory and other information on their site if they are not acting as a publisher. Twitter is now acting as a publisher. It is not censoring the president. It's not unconstitutional. They're a private company. But what is your reaction to this, and what do you think the Science and Technology Committee ought to do about Twitter obviously becoming a left-wing megaphone for social justice warriors and others? the president is with the people who are upset about George Floyd being murdered. I don't understand this at all.
It makes no sense. But so first off, I think all of us are, heart goes out to George Floyd's family.
Yes.
The video's disgusting. And there has to be an investigation. Look, the president's doing the right stuff. FBI and DOJ is going to do an investigation. I believe the president will do everything he can to make sure that if somebody did something wrong, they're going to get held accountable. Now, what Twitter's doing here makes no sense. Why do they think it's okay to censor the president, but nobody else? So I agree with you. I don't know. Now, unfortunately, the Commerce Committee is very partisan, right? So what the right thing to do is, if you're not complying with, if you're not just being, a independent arbiter, just putting the information up, so you're not held, you're not responsible for things. That's one thing. But when they're deciding now that, the president, because they disagree with him, because they become some left-wing group, that they can censor what he's doing, but nobody else, I think they're going to get held accountable.
See, there are two theories about Twitter. My theory is that Jack comes in one day a year, and then he goes back to his island and leaves George Costanza in charge. The other theory is that Jack actually wants the left-wing radical who is in charge of this stuff to actually promote Twitter as a social justice warrior enclave and do stupid stuff like this. Is just stupid, Rick Scott. Can the technology it's actually the Commerce Committee, and I do believe you have jurisdiction over Section 230, don't you?
We do. Yeah.
Would you hold a hearing on this or something like that?
I think so. I mean, clearly it's going to be up to the chairman, Roger Wicker, to make that happen. I can't imagine that we're not going to do it. I mean, what they're doing now is wrong. You cannot pick and choose who you censor. I mean, they don't censor anybody on the left. Nobody. And then they want to go pick the president. The left is so mad that Trump won, and they're so mad that Trump uses Twitter and Facebook and other social media things to get his message out. They're furious with this, and they're furious that he's going to win again.
You've never heard me, or anyone in this audience have never heard me call for Twitter to throw Louis Farrakhan off. They've never heard me do, and no matter how incendiary, even Khomeini, right? The man who wants to exterminate Israel has a Twitter account.
Hey, Nicolas Maduro's on. Okay, he's doing genocide against Venezuelans. He's there. Do they censor him? No, they censor nobody on the left. I mean, they were.
They're not even on the left. They are hardcore killers. They're just fascists.
Right, murderers. So Twitter testified in front of the committee, and I asked him, "Tell me why you're okay with this." And they give him this song and dance that they're just a platform and all this stuff. They're not just a platform. They're letting murderers like Maduro do whatever he wants. And then the leader of the free world, Donald Trump, who was duly elected, they want to censor him.
And I want to repeat for the audience, the tweet that they censored, and by censor, I mean embroider, otherwise comment on, treat differently from anything else on the site, was the president saying these thugs in caps are dishonoring the memory of George Floyd, and I won't let that happen. Just spoke with Governor Tim Walz and told him the military is with him all the way, any difficulty, and we will assume control. But when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Thank you. That, by the way, is exactly what happened in Los Angeles and the riots I covered in 1992. He is not encouraging shooting. He is trying to deter looting. And they might argue with his language, but that is nothing but censorship. Not unconstitutional, I want to stress. They are not a government actor, but they do enjoy the benefits of Section 230. Section 230 frees them from liability for the slanders or lies or reckless disregard of the truth that is published. And everybody with a comment section loves Section 230. But I think Twitter just gave it up.
Yep. Now, I don't know how they can do what they're doing. And by the way, why can't you protest peacefully? I mean, look, people are mad. What happened to George Floyd looks disgusting. Do it peacefully. Why do they have to go burn, stores that might be helping people in the community where these protesters live? Why would you do that to your community? It
was my experience in LA in 1992, Senator, that 99.99% of people are in fact in the category of victims when looting and rioting occurs. 99.99%. But you cannot control that 0.01% until the National Guard deploys. And I'm afraid it could spiral this weekend. Luckily, it's not going to be hot. Before I lose you, though, You're in the headlines this morning because you basically said Andrew Cuomo wants to tax Floridians. And I think he does, actually, the way that he wants to run phase 4.
Does. No, he does. He's got some of the highest taxes in the country. He can't live within his means. He can't balance a budget. The guy can't balance a budget. He can't say no to anything, right? And so he's taxed everybody up there he can because they're all leaving and moving down here because of their taxes. And now he says, oh, I'm going to take advantage of this coronavirus, and now I'm going to get Florida taxpayers to pay for some of the stuff I want. And then he goes to Trump and asks for all this infrastructure stuff that has nothing to do with the coronavirus. So and think about it, we've already given New York and all these other states, we've given states all across the country over $1 trillion in either loans or funding to deal with coronavirus. $1 trillion. And that's not enough because they want us to pay for their pensions, everything.
There's a deal to be had because, as the leader said, we need liability protection for American businesses, not-for-profit schools, churches. They need some income to make up for lost sales tax, lost property tax, lost everything, occupancy tax, you name it, visitors tax at Disneyland, you name it. They've lost taxes.
Open their economy.
That I agree.
Open their economy.
But the deal to be done. Would you support a deal that did that, swap some additional aid in exchange for liability protection? There's some other stuff like defense funding.
I'm not doing it. Hugh, I'm not doing it. We're going to end this year with $25 to $26 trillion worth of debt. $1 trillion worth of debt. In 1976, we had like $3 of debt per American. Now we have $77,000.
I understand that, Senator, but we actually won't be able to reopen without that liability protection. And there's $20 billion up in the red on the military from cost overruns from COVID that we've got to make up for our national defense.
I agree. I want liability protection, but we can't bankrupt this country. We will never get this economy going again. It's not fair to the poor. It's not fair to the people on fixed income. We are hurting them long term.
But we will never there are people who will not reopen. I've talked to the Restaurant Association people without liability protection.
I agree, Hugh. We got to get it done.
So that means we've got to give something to the left, right?
Hugh, what else can we give them? We've given them $150 billion.
More.
I mean, what else? I mean,
it's bank robbery. I know it's bank robbery, but sometimes you have to pay the bank robber and then catch him later at the polls in November.
Yeah. We'll see what happens. And what I want to do is I want the liability protection so we help our small businesses. I want to make sure we help the people that lost their jobs. I grew up in a poor family, and I want to help our small businesses that want to get reopened again. That's my focus. And so I don't know why the Democrats don't care about the people unemployed. They don't care about the small businesses. I don't get why they don't care about people having a job. They just don't care.
All right, last question, Senator Scott, quickly. I talked to a national security senior official. They're out $20 billion. They need a Virginia-class submarine that was cut. They have $11 billion in cost overruns because of COVID. They need some Coast Guard cutters. Are you in favor of putting all that list? It's about $22 billion total into phase 4.
I think we're going to have, absolutely. We're going to have a good defense budget this year. We've got to defend the freedom that we all cherish. So
I just put into phase 4, not all of it. I think it's about $22 billion, maybe a little bit more. Thank you, Senator Rick Scott. I'll be right back, America. Don't go anywhere. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
This is Albert Mohler for townhall.com. A chilling headline ran over Easter weekend from CNN. Louisville police officers to record license plate numbers of Easter weekend churchgoers. Over the course of this pandemic, I've argued that churches should follow generally applicable shelter-in-place orders, that these orders and guidelines do not violate religious liberty. Indeed, we ought to comply with them out of love of neighbor. But if policies single out churches and religious groups, it becomes an entirely different issue, an unconstitutional violation of religious liberty. Over the course of the last several weeks, some government officials have crossed the line. In the case of Louisville, it took a restraining order from United States District Court Judge Justin Walker to curtail Louisville Mayor Greg Fisher's attempt to prevent even drive-in church gatherings. The judge said, quote, "The mayor's decision is stunning, and it is beyond all reason unconstitutional. Consider this. In America, in 2020, comes the threat that they're taking names and they're taking numbers. It's extremely important that all American Christians take note, and in a hurry. I'm Albert Mohler.
ADF, fighting for those whose religious freedom is being violated. Trending now on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
On a personal level, Mr. Secretary, not as Secretary of State, do you believe that the Communist Chinese Party has told us the truth on any significant issue in the last 3 months?
Well, I'm sure there have been things that they've accurately described to us, but it's pretty clear at this point that the Chinese Communist Party is one of its central challenges in any institution that is authoritarian is the absence of the ability for information to flow freely. You saw this, Hugh, in the weeks before this. They decided to kick out U.S. journalists from the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post. You saw what happened when doctors raised their hand and said, hey, I think we have a problem. I think we potentially have a human-to-human virus, and it's spread. And they suppressed that by coercion and worse. Those are the kind of things that authoritarian regimes do. It's the nature of those regimes. And as a result of that, the information didn't get to the right places. And so for days and weeks, the world didn't know what was confronting it. And in a virus like this, those first hours and days and weeks are the most critical in stopping the spread. And the Chinese Communist Party failed to do that properly. I'll say this too, Hugh. We still need transparency today. We need openness today. We are still in the middle of this. We still don't know the precise source and origin spot of the virus. That will turn out to be important for epidemiologists and experts to help us get to the backside of this. We still need that kind of openness, and we urge every country that has information about the virus and data sets and is working on a vaccine or therapeutics to share that information broadly in the scientific community.
I'm in Montana. I found my heart again. I came looking for the one fish that Hugh Hewitt caught. Place really for men to come find their heart. I have been part of these Groundhog Day shows for how many years have we done this? 5-6 years in a row?
The questions that we talk through take a lot of religious crap out of it and really talk to the heart.
Even in the communications business, I'm supposed to be able to give words to what I see, hear, think, and feel, and I couldn't wrap my arms around what I had just gone through, the journey I had gone through.
If guys could figure out some of this stuff when they're in their 20s, we could change a generation.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. It's May 29th, Friday in the year of the plague 2020, but there's always some good news. It's Mark Perdue's birthday. Happy birthday, Mark Perdue. You got a good son in Jordan. Jordan sent me a note on Twitter. We listen to your show every morning between 7 and 9. I was wondering if possible, could you give a shout out to Mark Perdue on his birthday? Absolutely. Even though his last name signifies a university that does not have a football program, I'll do that. We love your program. Thanks so much. There, I got all the Boilermakers mad at me, and I said, happy birthday, Mark Perdue. If you listen to the show every day, you're a really smart guy. If you're a really smart person, you also know to wear a mask when you're on your scooter, Dwayne. And when you're out there bicycling, wear a mask. When you go into a store, wear a mask. If you're going to Costco this weekend or Walmart or something like that, wear a mask. Had a fellow come by yesterday to treat the house for wasps, the outdoor. Always Northern Virginia, like WASP heaven. And he was wearing a mask. We were talking. Good for him. All of you people who need masks, get them from givingmasks.com/Hugh. Because when you buy masks from them with every order, they send one of the high-end ones that are expensive to Children's Hospital. One of them of my choice. And I really believe they always run great fundraising, but they're always in debt because you don't make money on children being ill. You have to raise the money to take care of kids. I mean, the illnesses are so difficult. If you have a child in a children's hospital, you know that the angels all gather on earth and they go to work at children's hospitals. I mean, they go to work in this time everywhere. But the Gabriels and the Michaels and there's a third. They got the big three: Gabriel, Michael, and Raphael, Dwayne. Who's the third angel? They're like three. All the Catholics out there. Who's the third angel? Somebody send me a tweet. You just have to include my name in it. Gabriel, Michael's the big guy. But I'm screwing up. I'm going to lose my Catholic card. I do also want to tell you about Angel Tree. Speaking of angels, that was what we call a transition in the business. Speaking of angels, the Angel Tree folks over at Prison Fellowship have one more day to make goal. And one of their great donors at Prison Fellowship stepped up and said, here's $20,000, match it, and I'll give it to you. So if you can give me 10, they'll give me 10. If you can give me 1,000, they'll give me 1,000. If you give me 20,000, they'll give me 20,000. That's called a matching grant, Steelers fans. So phone in your donation at 888-206-2764 or go to HughHewitt.com and find the Angel Tree banner a little bit higher up. And I got to tell you, I got some news yesterday. It's astonishing to me about USC. They're holding classes at USC in the fall. It's a first ever thing. Many of you don't know this, but USC actually, it's an interesting kind of college. It's not a degree granting institution. It's the only college in America with a band that has no trumpets. They technically are in the Pac-12, but they don't really compete. And the best thing about it is you didn't have to go to class for years, but they thought they would take advantage of the disruption brought about by coronavirus, that when they reopen in the fall, they're actually going to do classes. Right? Notre Dame is doing classes, but they always do classes at Notre Dame. They're not very well attended by the football players, but they do classes there, and they're starting 2 weeks early. But I saw a note that USC is they're planning to open, and they're going to have classes. Can you believe it? No trumpets in the band. Next thing you know, they're going to put trumpets in the band. What in the heck? Why are you doing to me that? Ben, turn that off. Ben, turn that off. It is. There's audio in the background. I'm sure it's Ben. Yeah, it's Ben. I'm sure it is. As you know, it couldn't be the host. So that's Ben's computer. That's Ben's computer. I'm telling you, USC is holding classes. That ought to be the lead story. When I come back, however, we're going to talk about Hong Kong, which is the lead story, with Morgan Ortagus. She's the State Department spokesperson. Follow her on Twitter at State Department Spox, State DEPT SPOX. I'll be right back, and we turn serious for a moment when we return to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
In Minnesota, I mean, this is an actual factual reporting. The governor of Minnesota will allow 50 people in restaurants, but churches can only have 10. The governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, announced yesterday restaurants can host up to 50 customers in outdoor seatings, but churches will still be limited to 10, even outdoors. Now, again, call me crazy, call me cynical. I'm not quite able to wrap my brain around a church being told you can't have any more than 10 worshipers, even outside in the parking lot, but 50 people dining is A-okay with us in the state of Minnesota. Well, do you know what the Catholic Church is doing in Minnesota? They're saying, go pound salt. The Catholic Church in Minnesota issued a letter yesterday. The Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis announced they will just not be complying with the governor's mandate. The Archdiocese of Minnesota is pointing out, the Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis, the Twin Cities, they're pointing out the governor lifted Minnesota's stay-at-home order. But under the order, a maximum of 10 people are allowed within a confined space during worship services. The state's Catholic Church believes services can be held on its own terms as long as they take proper sanitation measures, private social distancing protocols, and one-third limited capacity. The letter says, we are blessed to live in a nation that guarantees the free exercise of religion. This right can only be abridged for a compelling governmental interest. That's why a large majority of states now allow in-person religious services. The letter is very explicit.
Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
Hey folks, I'm talking to Ken Starr. It's the Eric Metaxas Show. I'm holding in my hand his latest book. It's called Contempt. How would you answer someone who says what you did with Clinton is just about the same thing that Mueller et al. Did with Trump? What is the difference in your mind of your investigation and his?
The end product was we found absolute ironclad crimes. 14 different people were convicted in the Whitewater investigation, and for very substantive offenses. A number of the prosecutions, I don't say this critically, but it's a difference, in the Mueller investigation were convicted of so-called process crimes. Think of General Flynn, right? That, of course, is now being revisited. We will see what happens. I'm making no predictions about that. But with respect to the President of the United States, we found clear-cut evidence of crimes, perjury and obstruction of justice. And that's all laid out in the Starr referral. What Bob found, and what Bob Mueller found, was that there was no Russian collusion. Vladimir Putin, according to the report, it would be intriguing to get Bob Mueller to say here were his sources if he could reveal them. He might not be able to. Vladimir Putin, after the election, calls together some of his closest advisors.
Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
What Donald Trump wants in a press secretary is a Twitter troll who goes on attack, doesn't actually care about doing the job they have, and instead wants to impress an audience of one and make another part of official Washington another one of these essentially cable news and Twitter gladiatorial arenas. And it's a sign of the defining of deviancy down in our politics, and it's only going to make things worse.
I have one thing to say to this peculiar man who has some very strange sexual perversion in terms of his interest in my sex life. Really, get a grip, Jonah Goldberg. If Kayleigh McEnany was interested in an audience of one, she'd be writing for your publication, The Bulwark. Okay, Jonah? And secondly, indefensible and grotesque. Did you look in the mirror, Jonah? The COVID virus lock-in has not served you well, my friend. And if anybody's indefensible, it's an individual like you who calls themselves a conservative but has been the biggest cheerleader with your pom-poms for the absurd left-wing conspiracy theories.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
Welcome back, America. It's Friday morning, May the 29th, in the year of the plague, 2020. And my guest this morning is State Department Senior Spokesperson Morgan Ortagus. You can follow her on Twitter at State Department Spox, and Department is shortened DEPT-SPOX. That's counterintuitive for the Steelers fans out there. I don't know if Twitter will allow her to keep talking, but she is talking about Hong Kong, so we're very good to have. I always tell people, by the way, my son works at State with Morgan, so I've got a conflict of interest. I don't hit her with a hammer or anything like that when she comes on. Good morning, Morgan. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Thanks for having me again.
I laugh about Twitter. Before we go to the serious stuff about Hong Kong, it's the most absurd thing I've ever seen, and I don't think it's going to change you or the Secretary's approach to Twitter at all, will it?
No, I mean, we're very focused on the international side, so I spend a lot of time working with my team trying to figure out how we get our message into places like Iran and China, and obviously those people and can't use Twitter or Facebook or all these things. So we're very focused on the people of the world who don't even have access to the internet or to unregulated social media companies.
I just talked with Senator Rick Scott. He pointed out that the Ayatollah Khamenei, maybe I pointed that out, he pointed out Nicolas Maduro. Those are two of the preeminent Twitter users that Twitter and Jack don't censor in any way, shape, or form. It's a little bit ironic.
Well, we see it every day. The editor of the Global Times, which is the main propaganda outlet of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, we see him and other Chinese Communist Party officials, their ambassadors, are on Twitter around the world, spewing conspiracies. The conspiracy theory that the U.S. Army is the one that spread the coronavirus, I believe it first emanated from Chinese officials on Twitter. So their ambassadors around the world are prolific users of Twitter. They're still trying to figure it out. Sometimes we laugh a little at their translations. But they certainly, we have something at the State Department called the GEC, the Global Engagement Center, and we've uncovered some malicious bot networks now that the Chinese are starting to use that mirror actually what the Russians are doing. And it's pretty fascinating once you start getting into the research of what the GEC has uncovered.
We'll go back to Hong Kong in just a second, Morgan Ortagus. But when it does come to disinformation campaigns, how does the Department of State, do you hand that off to Homeland Security? Do you alert the companies like Twitter and Facebook that are targeted by the bots? How do you alert people that they are, in fact, being used by our adversaries?
That's a great question. So our mandate, obviously, at the State Department is overseas. It's international. So anything that touches the domestic side, we don't have purview over there. So yes, we'd hand it over to our sister agencies to have purview, like FBI, DHS, and others. But we do. So Leah Gabriel heads our GEC, and she will work behind the scenes with social media companies and say, look, here's what we've uncovered. We think you should look into this. We've actually had a couple, Guy Taylor from the Washington Times did a long piece on this as well, as did Betsy Woodruff, who's now at Politico. So we've got some good sources out there where we have exposed our research, and we try to, maybe like every 6 weeks when we have something that we can unclassify and share with the public, we do try to make sure people are aware. But the one fascinating thing that I would leave you with on this that people probably don't realize that we've uncovered during COVID-19 is the sort of trifecta between China, Iran, and Russia. So these countries are learning a lot from Russia and their disinformation campaigns. And you will see these three countries. We can see their malicious networks, on Twitter and other social media companies. They will start to retweet each other and use the same lines and source each other as as the reason for XYZ conspiracy theory, whatever it is. So the three of them have definitely, we've seen the three of them converge together in their malicious use of social media.
An iron triangle of disinformation. Let's turn to Hong Kong, Morgan Ortagus. I have been following, and I really tried via the South China Morning Post and a bunch of other sources to find out exactly how many people are being arrested, how widespread are the demonstrations. Can you give us a sense on Friday morning in the United States on the East Coast, what it looks like in Hong Kong as the day is ending and the week is ending, a week that goes down in infamy in Hong Kong?
Yeah, I would encourage your viewers to, or your listeners to look at Jimmy Lai and Joshua Wong and some other prominent pro-democracy activists in Hong Kong that are on Twitter. and they're giving great updates. I think that they are. There's definitely a sense, at least I felt this sense too, and talked to other people who work in Hong Kong. About a week ago, when the Chinese Communist Party signaled at their National People's Congress that they would be voting on this, what they call quote-unquote national security legislation towards Hong Kong. For me and many others, and I think for a lot of these prominent pro-democracy activists in Hong Kong, there was this, just a sense of dread and really a sense of loss. Because you knew that the Chinese Communist Party would have a difficult time not passing this legislation, and that was sort of the final nail in the coffin for us, for Hong Kong. So what happened this week is Secretary Pompeo had delayed by several months a report that he has to submit to Congress. So we submitted it last March. This report certifies the autonomy of Hong Kong from China. We're required to do that by law. So since we last did that in March of 2019, we saw the extradition law, which essentially said that Hong Kong citizens, for any sort of, infraction, could be extradited to the mainland, which, ensued a year's worth of thousands and thousands of people to the streets in Hong Kong protesting. That, of course, we saw violent crackdowns to those protests, arbitrary arrests and detainment. And really an erosion of the rule of law. And then, we've been watching this for a year, and then finally, when the Chinese Communist Party announced that they would be doing for this legislation, we should remind ourselves in this legislation, the National People's Congress are essentially calling the freedom-loving, peaceful protesters in Hong Kong, they're calling them terrorists. So they're using the language of national security to call free people, to call peaceful protesters terrorists, and so under the guise of national security, they want to shut down all of these protests. So we had to make the very sad decision, the Secretary Pompeo did, in order to certify to Congress this week that we can no longer, with a straight face, certify to the Congress that Hong Kong is indeed autonomous from China.
Now, I want to underscore Jimmy Lai, who's been a guest on this show this month, and his Twitter account is Jimmy Lai Apple. All right, that's very easy to remember. Jimmy, L-A-I, capital A-P-P-L-E, Jimmy Lai Apple. He only has 56,000 followers, and I wish everybody in this audience would go and follow Jimmy Lai and retweet, because he is becoming sort of the voice of free Hong Kong, and the fight isn't over. The fact that the law has been passed is not dispositive. They only have 5,000 troops in Hong Kong. But what do you expect to happen there, Morgan? What has the secretary said about what's ahead?
So the president has indicated that he's going to have a press conference at 3 p.m., I think around 3 p.m. today, but definitely this afternoon, where he's going to lay out a lot of our options. Hugh, this is one of the things where I think there's a pretty big bipartisan consensus of outrage of what the Chinese government is trying to do towards Hong Kong, and so there's a lot of places in foreign policy like Iran, JCPOA, and other areas that I deal with, Afghanistan, others which get highly partisan, very easily. On this one, I've been very, very encouraged to see, both sides of the aisle speaking out against this legislation. And so I think the president has a lot of options at his disposal. I know that you have many members of Congress on your show that have probably talked about options. So I'm always careful about getting out in front of the president. But, I just want to say that it makes me very pleased and proud to work for Secretary Pompeo and President Trump, because there has been this tendency, and this is the third administration that I've worked in, so I've worked for Republicans and Democrats, but there's this tendency sometimes in international relations for those of us not to want to deal with the hard issues and to want to talk about the world as the way we want it to be. And a real fundamental piece of foreign policy for Secretary Pompeo is calling out the world exactly the way it is, recognizing reality. We all I think Hong Kong has a special place in the heart of the American people. So many students go there for education, maybe to take a semester or two abroad. I was on Wall Street for a while, so I have many colleagues, that are desirous to go to Hong Kong and do a tour there for a year or two if you're in business or the financial community. So I think Hong Kong has a special place in the heart of the American people, but we're literally seeing nothing more than a communist takeover of the largest financial hub in Asia.
No, I had Senator Chris Coons, Democrat of Delaware, on Wednesday. Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican of South Carolina, on yesterday. You could not tell the difference between them when they spoke about Hong Kong, and that's very good. And they speak in terms of maybe granting residency to Hong Kong students who are here, expelling non-Hong Kong students, mainland students, as a show of displeasure. And the conversation that Robert O'Brien had with Chuck Todd over the weekend, I know that Secretary Pompeo said the same thing, which is we expect global financial centers to migrate to Singapore. Is that what you're expecting if this crackdown continues, Morgan Ortagus, for the banks to leave?
We'll see. These banks, and I worked for one of them that has a major, hub in Hong Kong. They will certainly do a risk assessment of what is the best position for themselves and for their employees. And a lot of these banks, like I said, you have Americans, Britons, other people that going to Hong Kong is a massive treasure and opportunity because you want to get experience in Asia. But yet you used to be able to be in a free and open system. And now, given what the Chinese Communist Party has decided to do, you're essentially going to be living under a Communist Party type system. So I think, listen, I want to also point out to your listeners that we put out a joint statement the United States did yesterday with the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia condemning this action from the National People's Congress. And I think that's so important that our allies are standing up with us and speaking up with us, especially those countries who signed on to the joint statement. I think that this is a pivotal moment in history. I think this is a moment of history that, my children, our grandchildren are going to look back and study, because this is the moment where every democracy, everyone who loves freedom around the world stood up to be counted. And they either stood up to the Chinese Communist Party and stood up for the rule of law, or they didn't. And I think there's going to be a lot of shame on the people who didn't.
Well said, Morgan Ortagus. It is certainly bipartisan. It is nonpartisan. I am glad to hear it as an alliance issue, and I'm glad. I did not know about that declaration. I will go and read that during the break. Morgan Ortagus, thanks for spending so much time for us this morning. Again, follow Jimmy Lai Apple and follow State Department Spox, and it's State DEPT SPOX to find out what Morgan is tweeting out every day as the Hong Kong crisis continues. Thank you, Morgan Ortagus. Let me remind you, relieffactor.com. It's that time of the day. If you're getting ready to have a great weekend, and I hope you are, more people are getting out. The restrictions are being lifted across the United States as the virus declines precipitously in some places. Other places still have to be very, very careful. Wherever you go, however far you run, walk, bike, stroll, shop, drive, take your Relief Factor before you do. It supports the temporary relief of the minor aches and pains that accompany aging, and you will be a day older by the end of this day. And exercise, and you may be out there moving around for the first time in weeks or months, taking the longer walk, going down to the square that you haven't been going to. Take relieffactor.com and get the starter pack, $19.95. Don't forget as well, Honor Bound Coffee. Get your coffee from honorboundcoffee.com and support the men and women in uniform in the United States. Every cent of profit from it goes to support military families. I'm coming right back on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Trending now on the Larry Elder Show.
Question, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black.
It don't have nothing to do with Trump. It has to do with the fact I want something for my community. I would love to see.
Take a look at my record, man. I extended the voting rights 25 years. I have a record that is second to none. The NAACP has endorsed me every time I've run. Come on. Take a look at the record.
All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Anyway, thanks. I will come back.
All right.
I look forward to seeing you in person.
Okay, absolutely.
Okay, pal. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it, Charlamagne. If you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black.
Notice Charlamagne had absolutely no problem with that. Either he didn't really hear it, or he didn't appreciate how he was being insulted, or he agrees with it. Either way, it's bad. If you have a problem figuring out where you want me or Trump, then you ain't black. Trump's black support is probably at least twice what it was in 2016, which means Joe Biden is asserting that there are millions of black people who are going to vote for Donald Trump who aren't really black.
Oh, I'm in trouble.
Of course, this is how he rolls, isn't it?
Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
Riddle me this. Who said this? Quote, "There is no one way to be black." Take it from somebody who has seen both sides of the debate about whether I'm black enough, end of quote. Who do you think said that? Joe Biden's boss, Barack Obama. There is no one way to be black. Take it from somebody who's seen both sides of the debate about whether I'm black enough, end of quote. Do you know that assertion was made against Obama when Obama ran for Congress against Bobby Rush, who's still in the House? Bobby Rush characterized him as not really black. He's not really from the city. He's from Honolulu. He went to Harvard. He teaches at University of Chicago. He lives in Hyde Park. He really isn't one of us. Hello? That same charge was used against Biden's boss, and now Biden is using it. Is this thing on?
Do you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump and you ain't black?
But then again, this is how they roll. Remember this gentleman?
I don't know how anyone of Hispanic heritage could be a Republican. Okay? Do I need to say more?
I don't know how many times I have been accused of being, quote, put here.
Welcome back, America. Do you believe in coincidences? I have Morgan Ortagus on to talk about Hong Kong, and then I get a denial of service attack. What a funny thing. Joined now by Eliana Johnson, Washington Free Beacon editor-in-chief. Good morning, Eliana.
Good morning, Hugh.
I would talk to you about Hong Kong and DOS, but I want to talk to you about Minneapolis. I said at the beginning, and you are a Minneapolis native, I said at the beginning, of all the cities in America, the last one I would have expected to have race riots would be Minneapolis. Would you have agreed with that?
I think so. I mean, it's nothing that I ever saw when I was there, though I haven't lived there for quite a while. But it's really terrible what's happening. And first of all, the situation that instigated these is absolutely terrible. I don't see anybody defending the actions of this police officer on any side of the aisle, but I think the response that's happening in Minneapolis is equally terrible, with businesses literally being destroyed and lit on fire. It really is a tragic situation.
And so my question to you is when you look at that and you see the Hennepin County attorney come out, I want to play for you the audio of what the Hennepin County attorney had to say. Mike Freeman last night, cut number 19.
Nothing to do with it? I think part of the problem is, sir, the video goes on for 7 minutes. He is clearly struggling to breathe during that time. And I think people will be hard-pressed to understand how you can't bring charges, at least against the officer who had his knee on that man's neck. It's a violation of my ethics to talk and evaluate evidence before we announce our charging decision. And I will not do that. I will say this, that video is graphic and horrific and terrible, and no person should do that. But my job in the end is to prove that he violated a criminal statute. And there is other evidence that does not support a criminal charge. We need to wade through all of that evidence to come through with a meaningful determination, and we are doing that to the best of our ability.
What do you think of that, Eliana Johnson?
It sounds to me like I had a little bit of difficulty hearing it, but it sounds to me like he's wrong, and I believe the office quickly walked that statement back.
Oh, I didn't know that. I had missed that.
I could be wrong, but I believe there was a walk back of it. But I think he's right that, of course, we need to evaluate all of the evidence, but it's pretty clear, I think, that what happened there was something worthy of a criminal charge. But also, now we know that this officer had a history of several complaints relating to these sorts of actions, which I think adds to the outrage.
One of those incidents was under Amy Klobuchar's watch. She did not prosecute him. What does that do to her likelihood of becoming the vice presidential nominee, Eliana Johnson?
Oh, there was already a tremendous amount of talk about this yesterday. I actually think Klobuchar would have been a smart pick for Biden, but I do think that this will obviate, greatly reduce her chances because there would just be an enormous amount of pushback, not only for Biden not choosing a racial minority of some sort, but then for choosing a white woman who has issues with the African-American community.
It's one of the first rules that Richard Nixon ever told me when I worked for him is when it comes to vice presidential selections, don't hurt yourself. It's really actually rule number one, don't hurt yourself. Amy Klobuchar is a positive liability now.
I think that's exactly right. And you already saw, statements from civil rights groups yesterday saying that if Biden chose Klobuchar, it would be a disaster.
So you've talked to people in Minneapolis, I hope. What is the expectation for this weekend? Has calm returned to the city?
I'm not sure. I've spoken with my family members really only, but the mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Frey, was late to say that that the looting and violence is unacceptable. It took about 24 hours. The first response was to say that protesters need to follow social distancing and make sure they're wearing masks. And so I think they were late to the game in trying to put an end to this. But obviously now with the National Guard called in, I think that obviously increases the chances that this will end over the weekend.
Just astonishing. It really is. Eliana Johnson is one of the experts inside the Beltway on life in Minnesota cold, though she hadn't lived there for half of her life. She does know it well and goes back often. And along with me, we're just shocked, and we pray for peace in Minneapolis. Eliana, have a good weekend. Thank you for joining me. Washington Free Beacon's editor-in-chief. Follow her on Twitter at Eliana Y. Johnson. Follow me to the last radio hour of the week. That means the Hillsdale Dialogue is straight ahead. We go from the lowest, there's the low point in the year. Riots, death, police violence, the virus, 100,000 American dead. What do? You go real high. You go to Hillsdale Dialogue with Dr. Larry Arnn, Dr. Carl Jung, and we talk about Pericles, who gave perhaps the most famous funeral oration in history. Maybe as appropriate as possible. Stay tuned, America. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you by Prison Fellowship's Angel Tree Summer Camps. Click on the banner at hughhewitt.com.
Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
Young people today, not even young, I would say even under 40, do not know what America was like when it was truly free. It's an early memory. There was a lightness, that's what it is. There was a lightness to American life. Today it is heavy.
Yeah, I had put a tweet out, I think about a day ago, that's gotten, 1.4 million looks on. It was a tweet. It said, somebody's told me Gavin Newsom says California won't get back to normal until we find a vaccine. And I wrote, California hasn't been normal.
More children died in their bathtub than from the virus. and you can't go to work in Pennsylvania.
Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
Listen to this one from the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. On the USS Theodore Roosevelt, 1,102 sailors were infected. That's a lot. That's a lot. How many do you think died? These are not children. Do you know the answer? Or because I want you, if you don't know, I want you to guess. 1,102 sailors were infected. How many needed to go to a hospital and how many died? Sean, guess. 1,100 on a ship. So they really got it, man. They got, they really got it. 100 went to the hospital, 2 died is Triple G's response. Living martyr?
Yeah.
Same? 50 hospital,
2.
And 2 died.
Yeah.
Answer, 7 hospital, 1 died.
Wow!
We are living through hysteria, and most Americans are at peace with tyranny. My dear friends, anybody says, what does MAGA mean? Make America great again? It means MAFA. Make America free again.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
On a personal level, Mr. Secretary, not as Secretary of State, do you believe that the Communist Chinese Party has told us the truth on any significant issue in the last 3 months?
Well, I'm sure there have been things they've accurately described to us, but it's pretty clear at this point that the Chinese Communist Party is one of its central challenges in any institution that is authoritarian is the absence of the ability for information to flow freely. You saw this, Hugh, in the weeks before this. They decided to kick out U.S. journalists from the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post. You saw what happened when doctors raised their hand and said, hey, I think we have a problem. I think we potentially have a human-to-human virus, and it's spread. And they suppressed that by coercion and worse. Those are the kind of things that authoritarian regimes do. It's the nature of those regimes. And as a result of that, the information didn't get to the right places. And so for days and weeks, the world didn't know what was confronting it. And in a virus like this, those first hours and days and weeks are the most critical in stopping the spread. And the Chinese Communist Party failed to do that properly. I'll say this too, Hugh. We still need transparency today. We need openness today. We are still in the middle of this. We still don't know the precise source and origin spot of the virus. That will turn out to be important for epidemiologists and experts to help us get to the backside of this. We still need that kind of openness, and we urge every country that has information about the virus and data sets and is working on a vaccine or therapeutics to share that information broadly in the scientific community.
Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
In Minnesota, I mean, this is an actual factual reporting. The governor of Minnesota will allow 50 people in restaurants, but churches can only have 10. The governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, announced yesterday restaurants can host up to 50 customers in outdoor seatings, but churches will still be limited to 10, even outdoors. Now, again, call me crazy, call me cynical. I'm not quite able to wrap my brain around a church being told you can't have any more than 10 worshipers, even outside in the parking lot, but 50 people dining is A-OK with us in the state of Minnesota. Well, do you know what the Catholic Church is doing in Minnesota? They're saying, go pound salt. The Catholic Church in Minnesota issued a letter yesterday. The Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis announced they will just not be complying with the governor's mandate. The Archdiocese of Minnesota is pointing out, the Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis, the Twin Cities, they're pointing out the governor lifted Minnesota's stay-at-home order. But under the order, a maximum of 10 people are allowed within a confined space during worship services. The state's Catholic Church believes services can be held on its own terms as long as they take proper sanitation measures, private social distancing protocols, and 1/3 limited capacity. The letter says, we are blessed to live in a nation that guarantees the free exercise of religion. This right can only be abridged for a compelling governmental interest. That's why a large majority of states now allow in-person religious services. The letter is very explicit.
This is Albert Mohler for townhall.com. A chilling headline ran over Easter weekend from CNN. Louisville police officers to record license plate numbers of Easter weekend churchgoers. Over the course of this pandemic, I've argued that churches should follow generally applicable shelter-in-place orders, that these orders and guidelines do not violate religious liberty. Indeed, we ought to comply with them out of love of neighbor. But if policies single out churches and religious groups, it becomes an entirely different issue, an unconstitutional violation of religious liberty. Over the course of the last several weeks, some government officials have crossed the line. In the case of Louisville, it took a restraining order from United States District Court Judge Justin Walker to curtail Louisville Mayor Greg Fisher's attempt to prevent even drive-in church gatherings. The judge said, quote, the mayor's decision is stunning, and it is beyond all reason unconstitutional. Consider this. In America, in 2020, comes the threat that they're taking names and they're taking numbers. It's extremely important that all American Christians take note, and in a hurry. I'm Albert Mohler.
ADF, fighting for those whose religious freedom.
Morning, Glory America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Greetings across my 400 affiliates. If you're watching on YouTube, the Hugh Hewitt channel, or on Instagram, the Hugh Hewitt Show, welcome as well. Or just direct on HughHewitt.com. That music means it is the last radio hour of the week, the third hour of the Friday show, and that means it's time for the Hillsdale Dialogue, which we've been doing since 2013 with Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College. All things Hillsdale are found at hillsdale.edu, including some of the best online courses in America for those of you who are doing teaching at home or spending your time in quarantine or social distancing and diving into great, superb content, hillsdale.edu. All of our prior conversations going back to 2013, which began long ago with Homer, we've come back round again, in fact, to the Greeks, are all collected at hughforhillsdale.com. Today, Dr. Arnn is joined by Professor Carl Jung. He has got his BA from the University of New Mexico, where he studied French and Russian. I guess as the War of 1812 was on his mind. He's got a BA as well in classical studies and his doctorate from Duke University, which is a degree-granting university in North Carolina. We are pleased to welcome you, Dr. Jung. We give Dukies a hard time here. We're kind of Tar Heels around here.
Yeah, I understand. I was a Tar Heel growing up, and by the grace of God, Duke accepted me, and I was able to get my PhD there.
What do Arkansas people think of North Carolinians, Dr. Arnn? Generally, whether they be Tar Heels or Dukies.
Well, they're like most people. They don't know where it is.
That's very well said. Dr. Arnn, look, you and I were corresponding this week about this project. And I described it as we're trying to figure out how we got here. By here, I mean May 2020, soon to be June 2020. How did the batons that were Jerusalem and Athens get passed? Why are we Western? And how would you describe that project, and why even attempt it?
Yeah. I want to say about Professor Young first that he's the symbol of Hillsdale College because he's a classical scholar, he's a veteran, and he's a power lifter.
Oh, he's like me, except for the veteran part. He's a power lifter.
Oh, man. Yeah, he wins the prize of the annual football team competition, at least for civilians and old people.
Hey, Dr. Young, give us a little powerlifting lingo. I actually have no knowledge of powerlifting lingo at all.
Well, powerlifting is a competition that features three events: the back squat, the bench press, and the deadlift. And my one claim to fame in athletics is that I was the 2014 North Carolina state champion in powerlifting.
Oh my goodness! Powerlifting is how I describe my working without a producer. Dwayne is kind of my daily power lift here at the Hugh Hewitt Show. But now let's get to matters serious. That is pretty impressive, actually, to be the North Carolina deadlift. But if you had to lift Dwayne every day, I think I could match you. Dr. Arnn, tell us about this project. Why do we care about those batons, and when do they become one?
Well, two things happened in the ancient world, and they're different things, and yet they have a related effect. And they're both like a flash of lightning going off. They're so different from everything around it. And one of them happened in Jerusalem with the idea of one God for everybody, eternal, and not of just a particular people. And the Jews brought us that, and then Jesus took it further. And then in Athens, this crazy little guy named Socrates, who was, a very fierce individual, truth be told, he just started relentlessly asking questions about the good without qualification, without our good, our laws, our people, just good. What is good? Why do we live the way we live, and why is it right? And so he introduced more radically than anyone ever had a standard outside our practices by which to judge our practices. And that gives rise to first political philosophy and then philosophy. And those two things together, see, because they both have this thing, they have this universal attitude behind them. They look at humanity as a thing, as a single thing. And there's an old joke about that because, of course, that, we still have families and we still have countries of our own and we still live in places and we still have languages. But the mental weather is changed by the idea that you have something in common with everybody else. That's why the Declaration of Independence is such a powerful thing and resonates around the world. And so, and then the point is that, those are, we've come, it's not apparent that we're following the Hebrew God or the Socratic dialogues in the way we live daily around here. For one thing, America itself, which is the inheritor of this Western civilization formed by reason and revelation, it's different than the ancient regimes. And that means it's not enough just to know that argument at the beginning, although at Hillsdale we very much think one must begin with that argument, because that's where that's where the questions that are most interesting were first asked and answered.
We began the second time around the track with Moses, the prophets, and the kings, and we will come back to Jesus after, and next week we will be talking about Socrates, but to set up Athens, the other baton, the second baton, reason, we've decided to start with Pericles. And Professor Young, is that a good or a bad choice?
Well, I think that's an excellent choice. If you think of David as representing leadership coming from Jerusalem, representing leadership founded on revealed wisdom of faith in God, then Pericles, I think, does represent that other pole of leadership founded on reason. And as you know, because you've read your Plutarch, right? This is the way Plutarch opens his account of Pericles, talking about the fact that Pericles was a man who studied philosophy. He was a man who was known to spend all day debating the leading intellectuals of the day, like Protagoras, Zeno of Elea, Anaxagoras, major pre-Socratic philosophers. He could spend all day debating with them, discussing philosophy. And Plato even credits him with, and Plato is usually a critic of Pericles, but Plato even credits him with using his philosophical studies to help guide his policies and decisions, and also his speeches.
So, Dr. Young, most people would be amused by the correspondence I received from Dr. Arnn because it's always in the same form. The first paragraph abuses me, the second paragraph educates me, and the third paragraph directs me. And he directed me that we would be doing Socrates when we got to the third paragraph next week. But the thing that I wanted to ask for his edification in mind, would there have been a Socrates had there not been a Pericles?
Is that for me or Dr. Arnn?
No, it's for you, because he, if the boss goes first, then you have to agree with him.
That's true. I think Socrates himself suggests no. In the discussion of different types of political regimes in the Republic, democracy rates kind of low in the hierarchy that Socrates puts forward, but he does say it has one benefit, and that is it tolerates many different ways of life. And so that means that democracy, by and large, also tolerates philosophers, which other regimes, say Sparta, for example, may not tolerate that kind of intellectual curiosity. So I think you could say at some level it did tolerate figures like Socrates, although, of course, we know in the end they ended up killing him. So,
well, that was my argument to Dr. Arnn. I'll give him the final word on it. We have to start with Pericles because he creates the conditions precedent for Socrates in which to engage in philosophy that would otherwise not have been allowed in, say, the court of Persia or even in Sparta.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Arnn, you get the last minute before the break.
Well, Athens was more open than Sparta before Pericles, but Carl mentioned that Plato was a critic of Pericles, and what he was a critic of him about chiefly was that Pericles was a little bit like Cyrus the Great in Persia. He did so much for the people that he corrupted their morals. He gave them a lot of free stuff. He built all of those wonderful buildings in Athens that we still go and see, and others that have fallen down, with money that he seized from other nations by taking over an alliance and turning them into colonies. And so Pericles was not the beau ideal of a statesman for Socrates, although it was a very great point Carl made, that a regime, the first test of a regime is, does it permit people to think?
When we come back, we'll tell you who he is, when he lived, what he did. The short segment next with the biographical details of Pericles when we return to the Hillsdale Dialogue.
How do we measure good? Is it defined by the majority? Is it measured by self-satisfaction or personal fulfillment?
The good of anything is found in its ability to accomplish what it was created for. To realize its purpose for existence, as intended by its maker.
Only in this realization can something truly be called good. The good is possible only in the light of truth.
Not truth as it is often defined today by personal preference or popular consensus, but truth as it is.
Independent from opinions and emotions. And where goodness and truth exist,
there you will find beauty.
We were created for a purpose.
Our purpose is not left to chance or whim,
but was determined by our Maker
and written in our nature.
Our purpose is to seek truth
in order to discover and to act on what is good and beautiful in this life.
Trending now on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
On a personal level, Mr. Secretary, not as Secretary of State, do you believe that the Communist Chinese Party has told us the truth on any significant issue in the last 3 months?
Well, I'm sure there have been things they've accurately described to us, but it's pretty clear at this point that the Chinese Communist Party is one of its central challenges in any institution that is authoritarian is the absence of the ability for information to flow freely. You saw this, Hugh, in the weeks before this. They decided to kick out U.S. journalists from the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post. You saw what happened when doctors raised their hand and said, hey, I think we have a problem. I think we potentially have a human-to-human virus, and it's spread. And they suppressed that by coercion and worse. Those are the kind of things that authoritarian regimes do. It's the nature of those regimes. And as a result of that, the information didn't get to the right places. And so for days and weeks, the world didn't know what was confronting it. And in a virus like this, those first hours and days and weeks are the most critical in stopping the spread. And the Chinese Communist Party failed to do that properly. I'll say this too, Hugh. We still need transparency today. We need openness today. We are still in the middle of this. We still don't know the precise source and origin spot of the virus. That will turn out to be important for epidemiologists and experts to help us get to the backside of this. We still need that kind of openness, and we urge every country that has information about the virus and data sets and is working on a vaccine or therapeutics to share that information broadly in the scientific community.
"22 minutes after the hour, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. It's the last radio hour of the week. That means the Hillsdale Dialogue. All things Hillsdale are collected at hillsdale.edu. Go and sign up for the absolutely free, old-style snail mail newsletter speech digest that is imprimis, which goes to millions of people every month. And also, all of our dialogues going back to 2013 are collected at hughforhillsdale.com. Today, Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale, is joined by Dr. Carl Jung, who is a professor of classics at Hillsdale College. And Professor Jung, I'm going to turn to you in this short segment. Pericles, all of our Steelers fans think that's what they pick up at the seashore. Would you tell us the biographical details of Pericles so we can get him in a time-space continuum for those people?
Sure. So Pericles was born in 495 BC in Athens. He was the son of Xanthippus, who was himself a very prominent politician. And his mother, Agariste, belonged to a very wealthy and powerful family, the Alcmaeonidae. And Later, during the Peloponnesian War, the Spartans used a curse associated with this family as a pretext for starting the war.
But wait, pause on that. How do you use a curse to start a war?
Well, one of the demands that Sparta gave in the negotiations before the war was there were two demands they made. One was that the Athenians revoke the Megarian decree, and the second was that they remove the curse from Athens, which was an oblique way of saying exile Pericles, because his family was associated with this curse.
Okay, got it.
So somebody violated the Temple of Delphi. That's right, Carl. And Pericles hunted him down and killed him. Right, and so that
Pericles' ancestor.
That's right. Pericles' family, his ancestor, and that involves because some of the people who were killed were seeking protection from the statue of Athena in the temple.
That's right.
And so that was handy for the Spartans because everybody knew Pericles was the man, and so let's get rid of him. Right.
So Pericles arrives on the scene as a Kennedy, as a Bush, as a Trump, as a big family guy with connections.
That's right. That's right, and he used those connections. I mean, first he had a great education. He was educated by the leading intellectuals of the day, and he had fabulous wealth, which he used to rise to power. He comes onto the scene politically. With his prosecution of a political rival named Cimon in the 460s. And Cimon gets off, but they later start this whole political rivalry that ends up with Cimon being ostracized for 10 years, and that clears the way for Pericles to rise to power. He also helped another obscure Athenian politician named Ephialtes pass a measure to get rid of the Areopagus, which was the old aristocratic council, and this is something that Plato later severely criticizes Pericles for because he thought that it poured too much unmixed liberty into the people, the way he put it, meaning that he destroyed kind of the balance of the Constitution by removing the aristocratic element.
Is he a populist in the sense that that term is thrown around today to describe everyone with whom you disagree, but who has support in the public?
I think that's fair. I think that's a fair categorization because most of his opponents were old aristocratic oligarchic families that didn't approve of the democratic policies that he pushed forward. Plutarch is somewhat critical as well. He basically says he's a demagogue until he obtains power, and then after that he sort of transitions to a more conservative government, an aristocratic government. I think you can make a case that his early policies, at least, were sort of populist in orientation.
And so, Larry Arnn, do you admire him with 30 seconds to the break? The long segment's coming up. We'll talk how he got to power and what he did with it when he got there. But do you admire him?
You have to admire him, but I love the contrast between him and Winston Churchill, whose war speeches are so different. I'll talk about that after.
We'll come back and discuss that in a moment. Don't go anywhere, America. You're listening to Hillsdale Dialogue. All of them are collected at hughforhillsdale.com. Head over to hillsdale.edu for the greatest online courses anywhere. Hillsdale.edu. Stay tuned.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you by Prison Fellowship's Angel Tree Summer Camps. Click on the banner at hughhewitt.com.
This is Albert Mohler for townhall.com. A chilling headline ran over Easter weekend from CNN. Louisville police officers to record license plate numbers of Easter weekend churchgoers. Over the course of this pandemic, I've argued that churches should follow generally applicable shelter-in-place orders, that these orders and guidelines do not violate religious liberty. Indeed, we ought to comply with them out of love of neighbor. But if policies single out churches and religious groups, it becomes an entirely different issue, an unconstitutional violation of religious liberty. Over the course of the last several weeks, some government officials have crossed the line. In the case of Louisville, it took a restraining order from United States District Court Judge Justin Walker to curtail Louisville Mayor Greg Fisher's attempt to prevent even drive-in church gatherings. The judge said, quote, "The mayor's decision is stunning, and it is beyond all reason unconstitutional. Consider this. In America, in 2020, comes the threat that they're taking names and they're taking numbers. It's extremely important that all American Christians take note, and in a hurry." I'm Albert Mohler.
ADF, fighting for those whose religious freedom is being violated. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
Hey folks, I'm talking to Ken Starr. It's the Eric Metaxas Show. I'm holding in my hand his latest book. It's called Contempt. How would you answer someone who says what you did with Clinton is just about the same thing that Mueller et al. Did with Trump? What is the difference in your mind of your investigation and his?
The end product was we found absolute ironclad crimes. 14 different people were convicted in the Whitewater investigation, and for very substantive offenses. A number of the prosecutions, I don't say this critically, but it's a difference, in the Mueller investigation were convicted of so-called process crimes. Think of General Flynn, right? That, of course, is now being revisited. We will see what happens. I'm making no predictions about that. But with respect to the President of the United States, we found clear-cut evidence of crimes, perjury and obstruction of justice. And that's all laid out in the Starr referral. What Bob found, what Bob Mueller found, was that there was no Russian collusion. Vladimir Putin, according to the report, it would be intriguing to get Bob Mueller to say here were his sources if he could reveal them. He might not be able to. Vladimir Putin, after the election, calls together some of his closest advisors.
We, the students of Hillsdale College, commit ourselves to diligent. We, the students of Hillsdale College, commit ourselves to diligent study and patient reflection. Having come to learn, we are proud
to do so with integrity, and will conduct ourselves with exemplary honor. As sacrifices past and present make possible our education, we too
become stewards of this college for the generations yet to come. We pledge ourselves to the pursuit of truth, the love of the good, and the cultivation of beauty.
For the sake of our minds and hearts, and for an ennobled society. By so doing, we embrace the high calling of liberal education.
Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
This nation that we live in right now is under attack. The values upon which it was built have been systematically sabotaged for decades. But in the last 8 years of the Obama administration, that desire to dismantle what we represent was shared by those in the highest office of the land.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. Last radio hour of the week. And this week we are talking on the Hillsdale Dialogue with Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College, and Professor Carl Jung. Dr. Jung has been teaching classics there for some time about a fellow who lived 500 years before Jesus. His name is Pericles, and he was a great, great statesman. Maybe not the best, but he was a great statesman. He was a great builder. He was a great orator. I will turn to you, Professor Jung. What ought, even the Steelers fans to know about Pericles? What ought they to put in their suitcase and take away about him?
Well, the biggest thing is he shepherded Athens through its golden age. In fact, scholars often refer to mid-5th century BC as the Periclean age because he is almost single-handedly responsible for the image of Athens that we have today, with the Acropolis and the Parthenon, Greek tragedy, Greek philosophy. All these things were flowering and happening in part because of his leadership, or at least he created the conditions for those things to flourish. He helped bring Athens into a state of empire. He helped bring about the takeover of the Delian League, which was a defensive alliance that Athens went into with a number of other city-states after the Persian Wars. He basically spearheaded an effort, which was started before him, but he was largely responsible for bringing the treasury of that alliance back to Athens, and he used that money to then in turn fuel this monumental public building program in the 440s and 430s BC, which resulted in the building of the Acropolis, the Parthenon, the monumental gates before the Acropolis, the massive golden ivory statue of Athena by Phidias, who Phidias, if you don't know, was basically the Michelangelo of the ancient world, a fabulous sculptor. Also, importantly, I think, the Odeum, which was a theater that Pericles wanted modeled explicitly after the Persian king Xerxes' tent, because it was known to be extravagant. Theater was also very important for Pericles' rise to power. I tell my students all the time that Pericles' rival, Cimon, gave the people bread because he famously fed the poor, but Pericles gave them circuses.
And so this great leader, and for whom an age is named, which is kind of a big deal to have an age named for you.
That's right.
He, though, leads his people into a war, the consequence of which, and we flash to the end, is disastrous, right?
That's right.
So, Larry Arnn, he's not a great man if you lead your people to destruction.
Well, first time I read carefully the funeral oration, the most famous thing, one of the most famous things said in the history of the world, Pericles' funeral oration. It comes early in the Peloponnesian War. Some people in an early battle are killed, and he gives the oration at the funeral ceremony. And he more or less says in that oration that we can't lose because we're the most virtuous. And he speculates about some things the Spartans could do, and they would be of no avail. And, you compare that to the speeches of Winston Churchill, very different tone. And not that, and see, the Greeks are very proud, the Greeks were, meaner than hell. And so they swelled up at that kind of talk, right? But of course, immediately after he gave the next thing in Thucydides' book is the plague starts, and the plague would eventually kill Pericles and two of his sons, I think, Carl.
That's right.
And Athens lost the war. And the Greeks, see, when you think about the Greeks, compare them to the Romans. The Greeks' greatest contribution to history is not their power and their empire. Those were short-lived. It's the philosophy and the sculpting and the architecture, right? That's why, but Rome is not as great as that, as great at that, in my opinion, at those things. And they follow the Greeks. But Rome was really good at rule. and they rule the world for several hundred years, right? And the Greeks never did that. So Pericles is important because there was a kind of pride or hubris that was manifested there, and he was extremely skillful man. He got everything right except one big thing.
Yeah.
And he was a tremendous military leader. Plato waxes eloquent about hearing him talk, how great he was. And, that's quite an endorsement, especially from a guy who doesn't approve of him.
Dr. Young, I've got to ask, there was a time when I could have said every schoolboy would learn Pericles' oration. That is no longer true, but it doesn't mean that the oration wouldn't deserve to be known by every schoolboy and girl. My question for you is, why is Pericles' oration considered so great? His funeral oration.
Well, in terms of classical oratory, it's truly one of the masterpieces of Western literature. It really is. If you read it in the Greek, it's some of the most moving, passionate, patriotic speeches you'll ever read. It truly is. It gives me goosebumps just to think about reading it. So it's a beautifully crafted speech. And as Dr. Arnn rightly said, Pericles had this great reputation for his oratorical powers. He was given this title, Olympian, which was an epithet usually reserved for the god Zeus because of his rhetorical abilities. He was said to thunder and lightning when he spoke. And I think Thucydides, when he writes this funeral oration, he really captures a lot of the power of Pericles' speech. Now, Thucydides tells us he probably didn't write it down word for word, but he captured the spirit of what was said there.
So, Dr. Arnn, you and Hillsdale have contributed to the current administration and past administration writers, people who script declarations for public figures. Ought they to study this? Is this a good thing for them to know and to try to replicate?
Well, they all do. Everybody has to read that at Hillsdale College. And I actually think that, how partial can I possibly be? I think Winston Churchill's speeches are significantly greater than Pericles, in part because they're so much better at enrolling right on the side of Britain, right? Pericles does that too. We're free men, and that's our strength. He makes that argument.
He claims equal justice under the law. He claims that is what we have here in Athens.
That's it. But he's not laying the ground for that properly, right? I mean, I think myself that Plato is right about that. And we have the founders of America on our side in that argument, that he should not have reduced the elements that divided power and channeled authority in Athens. And, Athens, democratic Athens was guilty of crazy things, right? In the Peloponnesian War, they sent a force off to Syracuse. It happened more than once. And then while it's on its way, they send another force to arrest the leaders of the first force and drag them back and try them. And that was partly because all the citizens got together and vote in the amphitheater, and the amphitheater didn't hold them all. And so get out to vote was decisive. And so they would make a decision, and the people who didn't like it, who hadn't been paying much attention, they'd get all fired up, and they'd have another meeting the next week and change the decision.
Not an ideal means of governance.
That's it.
No. Well, tell me a little bit, Dr. Young, about the plague, because obviously we live in a time of a plague, and so ears are going to perk up. These are not new things in history. This was, however, significantly devastating on Athens in that it claimed not just Pericles and his sons, but thousands of other Athenians.
That's right. And we're not sure about a lot of things. We're not sure what the plague was. There's been a number of speculations. Smallpox, typhus, or typhoid fever have been proposed, and we're also not sure exactly about the extent of the death because population figures are hard to come by in this period. But the way Thucydides describes it in Book 2 of his histories is thoroughly devastating to the the values and customs of society. He focuses, the part that always stays with me is he talks about how the Athenians weren't able to bury their dead properly. The proper religious rituals were not observed because people were thrown into such fear and panic. They didn't want to get close to other people who might be infected. So they would just, one citizen might be building a funeral pyre for his relative, and some random Joe would come along and just throw another dead body on there, which was total sacrilege for the Greeks. I think that's the big takeaway for me is the sort of social impact of the plague.
Dr. Arnn,
would
would you say a lesson would be that you do not allow an illness, however widespread, to do great damage to your values and customs?
Well, in that world, they didn't have the means that we have to try to figure these things out, and we can't figure them out fully, right? So, but remember, it may have, well, I'll make the point, it may have had something to do with the fact that Sparta was the great land power, and in the funeral oration, Pericles explains the strategy. We're going to fight them on the sea, and that means they're going to get to ravage our farmland, and we're going to get our food by trading by sea, and they have the long walls that go from Athens down to the Piraeus, which is still the port of Athens, by the way. And, what is it, 6 or 8 miles, I think? And so the Spartan hoplites come up, and they can get to the walls of Athens, but they can't take the walls down. And so Athens is secure. But that meant all the farmers had to come into town, and it meant the population of Athens swelled up real big, and that meant that the disease spread faster.
With the consequence of the ravaging not only of the population but of the leadership. When we come back from break, we'll talk about what this all led to. So you have an Athenian great laying freedom and benefits upon his people, starting a war and then dying on him. And what is the consequence of that? Plutarch wrote about it, Plato wrote about it, Thucydides wrote about it, and Professor Young and Dr. Arnn will comment on it when we come back. Let me remind you, it is the weekend, thank goodness, a grim one as we turn out of May, and by the time I come back, Kurt Schlichter will be here on Monday filling in for me. We will be in a new month, turn a corner into campaigning season, but hopefully you'll have a weekend. You'll be back to being a weekend warrior. We're reopening. People are doing stuff. Don't forget your relieffactor.com. Get out and about. Get out in the sunshine wherever it shall be pleasant. I know there's some parts of the country where it's not going to be that way, but if you can, enjoy the fact that the country is reopening, that the governors, probably in response to the people's demands, are saying, yeah, get out there, you betcha. Well, take your Relief Factor first, exercise, enjoy, move, keep moving. Do your exercise, get a little bit older, but do it better with relieffactor.com. $19.95 is a 3-week starter pack. Give it a shot. I carry in curcumin, resveratrol, and omega. The only supplement I take, the one that you ought to be taking every day, relieffactor.com. Coming right back on the Hillsdale Dialogue. Stay tuned.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by No Safe Spaces.
It means excellence never comes without sacrifice.
It means worthwhile rewards never come for free.
It means circumstances can never become an excuse.
It means time spent in
proving is never wasted.
It means quitting is never an option.
It means the choice to go farther, in competition and in life, is mine alone to make. And in the end, is worth every step.
This is Albert Mohler for townhall.com. A chilling headline ran over Easter weekend from CNN. Louisville police officers to record license plate numbers of Easter weekend churchgoers. Over the course of this pandemic, I've argued that churches should follow generally applicable shelter-in-place orders, that these orders and guidelines do not violate religious liberty. Indeed, we ought to comply with them out of love of neighbor. But if policies single out churches and religious groups, it becomes an entirely different issue, an unconstitutional violation of religious liberty. Over the course of the last several weeks, some government officials have crossed the line. In the case of Louisville, it took a restraining order from United States District Court Judge Justin Walker to curtail Louisville Mayor Greg Fisher's attempt to prevent even drive-in church gatherings. The judge said, quote, "The mayor's decision is stunning, and it is beyond all reason unconstitutional. Consider this. In America, in 2020, comes the threat that they're taking names and they're taking numbers. It's extremely important that all American Christians take note, and in a hurry." I'm Albert Mohler.
ADF, fighting for those whose religious freedom is being violated.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. The Hillsdale Dialogue is underway on the last radio hour of the week. It's May the 29th, 2020. Dr. Arnn and Dr. Young, I'm thinking about the notes you sent me. It's always bad to be blindsided. It's particularly bad to be blindsided by a friend. That's hurtful. But I mean, to be blindsided by Plato is really to leave a mark. Did they know each other, Dr. Young? Do we have evidence that they were actually acquainted, Pericles and Plato?
Not Pericles and Plato. Plato was a generation after Pericles. Socrates and Pericles may have overlapped, or did overlap.
So would Socrates have influenced Plato's opinion of Pericles, which is not high?
Probably. I mean, Socrates famously fought at the Battle of Potidaea, which was one of the first battles of the Peloponnesian War. So he probably had some very strong feelings about Pericles' policy. As you say, Plato has Socrates treat Pericles pretty harshly in one of his dialogues. He says matter-of-factly that Pericles was not good at politics, and he accuses him of making the Athenian people worse than they were before his rule. So he was a pretty harsh critic. Elsewhere, he treats some of his specific policies a little more obliquely. He doesn't name Pericles by name, but he does critique the policy, especially the one I mentioned earlier about the Areopagus, the old aristocratic council. Removing that, he thought was a blow to the stability of the regime. For Plato, a sound regime is a moderate regime, one dedicated to moderation. And Dr. Arnn was right when he was talking about the funeral oration earlier. He does list some virtues, such as equal justice under the law and freedom, but what he doesn't mention in that speech, the funeral oration, is the virtue of moderation.
So Thucydides and Plutarch, Larry Arnn, are high on Pericles. Plato is not, and of course, you're comparing him to Churchill is unfair to him in this respect. he does not have the modern challenges that Churchill had before him, and so he can't rise to the same level of greatness, right? It's spears, not bombers. It's a fewer number of people, not the whole world that's engulfed in war. But is Plato fair, or is this a blindsiding? Is he unfair to him in his evaluation?
Well, the foundation of political science is in, Socrates and his students, and the criteria they use to judge them are not really changed by modern conditions. In other words, the first criteria is it good for the greatest good for the greatest number? And the way you get the greatest good for the greatest number is you encourage people to live a good life, a virtuous life. And to fall short on that is to fall fundamentally short. And, I can show you comparing first of all, it's I'm not a scholar on Pericles in the way Carl is, but, there's not that much of what he wrote or what he said. And so I've read that. And you can just see that there are very important things left out in that speech. For example, encouraging the Athenians to restraint in that speech would have been a good feature. And Churchill always does that. And George Washington always does that. And Abraham Lincoln always does that. Because it's a generous thing to do, right? Just think. Plato writes these things about Pericles. The other student, the only student of Socrates who was a statesman, Xenophon, there were 4 people, Carl, who wrote about Socrates who knew him, or 3.
That's right. Well, Aristophanes and Antiphon also.
Yeah, and so one of them is Xenophon, and he writes a book called The Education of Cyrus that's riveting. And Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Persian Empire, and his criticisms of Cyrus, which are extremely cleverly put, by the way, and never really made explicit as Xenophon's opinion, they're just like these criticisms by Plato of Pericles. He didn't, George Washington, his message to America and the world is, in his first inaugural, our republic is founded on the great fact and the whole course and economy of nature, the indissoluble connection between virtue and happiness. See, you have to be a good people. The Declaration of Independence addresses itself to the good people in the world, right? And so that distinction is replaced significantly in Pericles' funeral oration by power.
Yeah.
And that's why, the Romans, they were, the early Romans leaders, they were pious and restrained and fierce. And the Greeks were fierce. There's not time to read it, but I'll just mention that early in the Peloponnesian War, the Corinthians give a description to the Spartans of the way the Athenians are. And they're lethal. And you Spartans are too slow and too conservative.
You stay at home. When we come back next week, Socrates is our subject, Cyrus in 2 weeks. Dr. Young and Dr. Arnn, thank you. Thank you, Adam, Ben, and Dwayne. Thanks, all of you. Enjoy the weekend. Monday, Kurt Schlichter is in for me, and I'll be back Tuesday on the next Hugh Hewitt Show.